Hi, I'm Eddie from 4250.
I'm Ryker from 4250.
I'm Gianna from 4250.
And this is the Gaming Area Podcast.
November has been an absolute great month for video games this year, as we've seen some releases we've been waiting a long time for, one of which being God of War Ragnarok, which is an absolutely amazing story-driven game that absolutely lives up to the first one as just being a phenomenal story. The characters are amazing. The graphics are spectacular for even on PS4 when it was originally a PS5 game. It is really amazing, and I don't want to go too far in depth because I am, spoiler alert, releasing an article review on it later this month, which you all should read. I haven't completed the game yet, but so far it is absolutely spectacular, and I think everyone should play it and the first game. God of War Ragnarok has not been the only game released this month, as we've also seen the recent release of the new Pokémon games, which Gianna will now talk about.
The new Pokemon games were originally released, supposed to be released on November 18th, and it caused a lot of excitement. Then people kind of started playing. The graphics have been actually really terrible, and I have been a fan of the Pokemon community, or just the Pokemon series in general, since I was 7, so I've had a lot of experience with Pokemon games, playing X and Y and Black and White on the 3DS, and then moving over to Alola, which, 3DS or 3DS XL, they've been really good so far. The graphics have not always been great, but you don't expect that from a Pokemon game. Ryker, I noticed that you wanted to say something about Pokemon, Sun and Moon, or Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, so you are allowed to do that.
I think that Pokemon recently as a franchise has been getting lazier, as the later 3DS games like Alpha Sapphire and not Sun and Moon, but Ultra Sun and Moon were definitely improvements. Were really good and had good animation and looked good for 3DS games, but the switch over to, pun not intended, the Nintendo Switch, I think dropped the quality of everything, more or less.
I will say, though, that I completely understand your point, but I feel like Nintendo has been trying to tackle different things, and that is why the quality has dropped, because they're focusing on one thing, and then they let other things fall. I mean, you could ask a person who has bias towards any of their favorite games. With Pokemon X and Y, I have extreme bias towards it because I've been, I played it at age 7. It was my first ever game, and I learned a lot about just reading in general because I did not have the reading comprehension that most people should have while playing Pokemon games. But for the most part, there's people who say that Black and White has the best story. I don't disagree. I love N. I love the story entirely. With Pokemon Sword and Shield, I feel like it was more open, and that left a lot of room for having fun on your own. But at the same time, the story was extremely lacking. We finally get to see adults actually pitch in for the problems. The protagonist finally doesn't have to do it all by themselves. Leon is like, hey, yeah, I'll fix this Dynamax issue. But they put so much love into Dynamaxing that they just left the story on its own. It was pretty mid. It was mid. And then for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I have not played it yet, but I have huge hopes for it, considering that there will be 3 different storylines, and the characters seem really interesting so far.
Going back to the story being lackluster in Sword and Shield, yes, some aspects were not great, but the one thing they did do amazingly well is your rival in that game, as I think he is the most compelling rival in any Pokemon game. And I genuinely felt bad when I beat him, because his story was written really well.
Do you mean Hop or do you mean Bead?
Hop.
Okay.
For sure. He was super well written.
I know, Hop was absolutely well written, and I think that Pokemon actually gave a character more of a 3D personality instead of a 2D flat one, you know what I mean? Yeah. When Hop loses, you feel the weight of, he was trying so hard to be his brother, trying to live up to these expectations that having a champion of a brother puts on you. And Hop was trying to change his Pokemon team and change himself to be more like Leon, until at the end he realized that being himself was the most important part. And he still cares about you as a friend, even if he loses. And I think that's beautiful, that he wasn't so petty like Bede. And anyways, the final evolutions got leaked before the game actually came out. It's Pirigatito being on, 2 feet, and I've just been really interested because the 3 starters, of course, and this is obviously going to segue into our next section, Sprigatito, Quaxley, and Fuecoco are the 3 starters. And now to Eddie.
Okay, so I know that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet had a tie-in with Splatoon 3 in the form of a Splatfest. You had to choose one of the 3 types to fight for. And if I remember correctly, in the end, Water won by a large margin. All 4
categories, yeah.
All 4 categories. They just absolutely dominated. And there's going to be a new major update for Splatoon 3 on December 3rd that is going to involve 3 brand new weapon types of the shooter, charger, and roller class. I personally really love the rollers. I think it's a fun take on this sort of genre of fighting.
I was going to say charger, and I was going to get so mad.
And they're also going to release the Big Run. And I know personally, I really loved the Salmon Run. It was probably my favorite mode out of the entire game. So I think adding a new one where you can play on these maps that we already know is going to be very interesting. And also, they're going to be adding X battles for the very hardcore players, which I know I am definitely not a hardcore player. I mostly just stick with casual, but I feel for the people that are really into it, I think it'll be a good option for them. So this is completely unrelated to Splatoon 3, but they released Among Us VR, which is, I mean, it's Among Us VR. That's pretty crazy and just kind of hilarious, you know. When you take the chaos of the original Among Us and like the fan base and you add this extra layer of depth to it by immersing yourself into the game, I'd imagine it'd make for a good experience. I mean, because originally all you had was the VR chat Among Us game, and it was a little janky, but I thought it was pretty good. For a while, it was all we had. And that is all the time we have for today, so thank you for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.